Hello knitting friends, Shaina Bilow here. In today's series of videos, I am going to walk you through the steps of seaming together a particular design of mine. This one is called the Blurred Lines sweater. And we're going to go through all the ways, all the processes of putting this piece together. All right, it's going to be so fun, and I'm so glad you're here with me. I love seaming sweaters together, and I hope that you will too after getting a bit of practice. So I want to talk about the pieces that I've got in front of me right here. I have the back to the sweater, and you'll notice the shoulders here have a stair-step bind off. So I have the back to this sweater. I have the front to the sweater as well. And I want to point out that when I knit these two pieces, I made sure that my shoulder shaping started at the exact same stitch point on each. So you'll notice I have a texture here that helped me keep track of the rows. As I got to the end of the sweater, when I was ready to start my shoulder shaping, I made sure I started it at the same place. So if you have a sweater that you're working on now before seaming and you can control how many rows each piece has, make sure they match. To that same end, I made my sleeves exactly the same. They have the same number of rows in each, and they ended at the same pattern row at the top. All right, so in preparation for our workshop today, I did give my pieces just a quick steam. I didn't block them, exactly to measurements. I wasn't extreme about anything, just a quick seam, partially because I had to rip these sleeves out and redo them because I goofed up my pattern. So I wanted to make sure the stitches were laying a little more evenly and that it all worked out. So I wanted it to look nice and fresh for you all. I also, when I steamed, just gave the edges a little unroll, but you'll see they still roll. So typically I wait to block my sweaters until I've finished seaming them, but again, in this case, I just did it beforehand quickly. Not a big process. It was about 20 minutes ago. They're fairly dry now. Materials here. You'll need a tapestry needle. If you've seen any of my finishing videos before, you'll know I love the bent tip tapestry needles with the blunt eye. This one is the Clover Chibi, and I love them because they scoop. This sort of acts like a shovel, the bent tip. So if you've never tried seaming with these before, do grab yourself a set because they're fabulous. A pair of scissors, of course, and then I happen to use a different yarn for seaming than I do for knitting on most of my sweaters. The first reason is it's easier to see as you're seaming, and so you as a new seamer will have an easier time getting it started, your project. But another reason it's nice to use a contrasting yarn is because sometimes our knitting yarns aren't ideal for seaming. In this case, with this sweater, I have a thick and thin yarn, which would make for kind of an uneven seam, right? I've got a little bit of a thin piece here, thicker here. Additionally, it's a linen cotton, so it grabs on. It doesn't glide smoothly. This one happens to be pretty sturdy, so if I wanted to, I could seam with it. But sometimes our knitting yarns are not too sturdy. I've made two of these sweaters. The first one was made with a much softer wool yarn that if I had tried to seam with it would have just started shredding apart. So when I choose a yarn that I'm going to do my seaming with, I make sure it's something that is strong. So here I'm really tugging this. It's thin. It is it's in the same color range as what I'm knitting on. So here I feel like this picks up the lighter parts of my cotton linen blend. And it's smooth. So those are some of the things I look for in a complementary yarn to seam with. You can use stash yarn. Just give it the tug test. Make sure it's strong enough that it can resist a lot of tugging. In this video here, we've talked a bit about materials, and I've shown you the pieces and a few things I did to prepare it, like blocking and making sure all of my rows were the same count. Now I'm going to quickly talk about how the pieces are going together and then which videos we're doing what step in. So in this first video, I'm going to show you how to seam together the shoulders using stitch to stitch seams. So once those shoulders are together, we'll just go like that because then we'll have like a poof in the middle with the neck, but we'll be seamed up here on the shoulders. So once the front and the back are seamed together, then we're going to take our sleeves. So video number 2 will deal with putting the sleeves onto the side of the sweater here. In the third video, we will have our shoulders seamed already. We'll have our sleeves attached, and then we'll work on the sleeve and side seams. And then in the fourth video, I will go over picking up stitches for the neckline and blocking and weaving in tails. Let's begin seaming the shoulders. I have my front and my back aligned so that my right side is facing me. So the mattress stitch is done with the right side facing. That means I'll be able to tell how my piece will look before it's even finished. Okay, I'm going to take a generous helping of my finishing yarn, about 3 times the width of my seam plus some. And I'm going to thread that onto my tapestry needle. And get ready to begin. I'm right-handed, so I will be seaming from right to left. If you're left-handed and prefer to hold the tapestry needle in your left hand, you'll start on the other shoulder from left to right. So we're going to do work these shoulders from the outside towards the inside. So I'm at the shoulder seam working in towards the neck. Before I start seaming this, I'd like to show you what a stitch looks like in knitting. A stitch is a little letter V, this little heart here. So as we're seaming, I'm going to be picking up the stitches, those little letter V's, or upside down V's in this case, that are right below the bound off edge, or in the case up here, above the bound off edge. We're not going into the bind off edge itself. We're going into the stitch that's just below or above it, just adjacent to it. All right, so let's look at the stitches again. We've got a little letter V here. Here's a stitch. Here's its neighboring stitch, another little letter V. Sometimes they're more pronounced where the bottom condenses to make that V shape. Another time they're a little wider. This one seems a little wide, probably to do with my thick, thin yarn. In between 2 V's is an A, or you could think of it as an upside down V, whatever works for you. I'll call them A's in this video. Beginning here at the edge, I'm going to take my tapestry needle and insert it from the bottom or back of the work to the top at the corner. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this side. So on the top part versus the bottom, I'm going up. And then I'm going back into the bottom section here. What this does is it creates a little figure 8. There we go. That helps pull the 2 corners together and catch the yarn. So once you have that little connection done, I want you to hold the top piece in your hand and open it up a little bit with your fingers so you can see what you're looking at here, what we're dealing with. Mattress stitch is worked by diving in with the tapestry needle. So I'm going to dive in under the very first stitch that looks like a letter V on the top. And then I'm going to pull my yarn, leaving a gap between the 2 pieces. That's intentional. Then I'm going to come to the bottom part and pick up the very first A. So again, notice my needle is diving in and scooping up an A. Then I come to the top piece again, dive my needle into the very next stitch, which I can tell is the next stitch because my finishing yarn is coming out right here. If I go into that same space and scoop up the next stitch, I haven't skipped a thing. And repeat on the bottom. I dive in the same hole the yarn's coming out of, and I scoop up the very next stitch. So I'm going to continue in that way until I get to my first stair step, which is right now. So once you've gone across to the point where if I pick up my next V, I'm way down in the middle of my work, right down here. And I want my tapestry needle to be up here when I finish a stitch by the top of the stair. So what I'm going to do here is enter at the bottom of the stair and exit at the top. So my needle is bridging the gap between these 3 rows. 1, 2, 3. My needle enters here on row 1 and comes up over here on row 3. So I've taken both sides of this column of stitches. So this is 1 stitch here. I'm taking this part from row 1 and the second half right here from row 3. So my needle goes in basically at an angle to walk up or down the stair. Here again. So this is my column. I'm entering here and then exiting way up there. So my needle is actually still just within that 1 column of stitch. I just happen to be scooping it up from 2 different rows. That is how you deal with any stair step. Here, luckily, I have some nice smooth sailing, straight stitches. I'm going to carry on. Yeah, and now I'm at a stair step. So with this design, there are a lot of stair steps to deal with, and I'll talk about that in a second, why that's important to keep your stair steps. But here we go. I'm going in on one side of the stitch, coming out on the other side, same as I would have here, except this half of the stitch, that second half, is on a different row. That's the concept behind these stair step seams, is that you enter on one side of the stitch, exit on the other, the same way that we've been doing, but now we're going up or down to the appropriate row where the stitch comes out on. And every 2 inches or so, 5 centimeters, you're going to pull this yarn tight, your finishing yarn. And it's hard to pull again because of that linen that I have here in the main sweater. It's just a little more sturdy, crunchy. All right, so there's the beginning of my seam. Once I've pulled that tight, you'll notice you can't see that finishing yarn anymore. Here's the seam on the back. You can see where the little stair steps meet. No big deal. But this is a seam. It's beautiful, I think. We're going to loosen up that last stitch and then start picking up again with that seam the same way that we were seaming. So anywhere where you don't have a stair step, it's just a regular V on the top, A on the bottom, and anywhere where you do have a stair step, it's half of the V from one platform, one level, and the other half from the next level. So here and then coming out at an angle. And let your eye trail down to find those stitches if you need to find that column that you should be picking up in. But yep, you dive in, scoop up a stitch. Dive in, scoop up a stitch. And work those stair steps when you get to them. Same concept, diving in, scooping up a stitch. It just happens to be spread out among 2 rows. Okay, so here I've gone another 5 centimeters or so. As you're starting off as a finisher, go every inch and pull tight just to make sure you haven't made any knots, because if you accidentally pick up the same stitch twice or catch your finishing yarn inside the needle, you'll end up with a knot, and in that case you have to undo your stitches and go back, which is another great reason to use contrasting yarn. It's much easier to see your stitches that you need to undo should you need to undo them. You'll see when you have one of these bind-offs, it looks really nice where the stitches align with one another. So if this had been colorful stripes or something, you'd see these really nice triangles. Here with the texture, you do have that triangle where it connects. It's really pretty. I'm going to keep finishing this side. While I do, I'm going to talk about why it's important to work these stair-step bind-offs. There are alternatives to working a stair-step bind-off. One of them is short rows, and I would not recommend that in a case like this, where we have a lot of stitches, a lot of rows involved in the stair-step bind-off. And the reason that I would not do that is because we have a lot of space here, horizontally and vertically, of stitches and rows. So if you were to work short rows and then bind off in one fell swoop, you're condensing all of that height that we've created with the short rows into one row of knitting in the bind off, and it just doesn't have the same flexibility and depth as these bind offs would. There are ways to do a smoother bind off at the shoulders, and that involves slip stitches and things like this as you're binding off. That would be fine to do because that still is just working small row sections with one another. So totally fair game. All right, getting towards the end here. I'm just picking up each stitch as I go. Again, a V to an A, and always make sure that you're picking up a V on the top and an A on the bottom. And if you have trouble seeing it, just let your eye scan down into the fabric. And I'm seeing here, it looks like maybe I have one extra stitch on my bottom part, so I'm going to take half of a stitch here, just a half of a V to a full stitch here. Who knows why that happened? Maybe I have a decrease, one extra decrease or something like that. And then right here. But it will all come out in the neckline pickup. And then I pull tight to close it up. So my first shoulder seam is done. I'm going to gently kind of stretch out the yarn that I had used to finish it to make sure that it has some flexibility here. And that's my seam. I tend to leave all my tails till the end. First reason I do that is because I do not like weaving in tails. So if I can just do them all at once, that works out better for me. But the other reason it's a good idea to leave your tails till the end is because sometimes you may feel like, oh, I need to rip something out. I don't like the length of my sleeve and I need to add more, or whatever it is. If you leave your tails till the very end after you've tried on your sweater, then the odds are good that they will be in the right place and you can just weave in all the tails and be done. All right, so that is our shoulder seam. What I would do next is turn the sweater around, cut another length of my finishing yarn, and begin the next shoulder. I will start this shoulder with you here. And if you'd like to see me seam an entire shoulder, just rewind this portion of our video and you can see that. So I'm starting in the bottom and I'm pushing my needle from the wrong side towards the right side. Then I go to the top and I push that tapestry needle from the wrong side towards the right side. And then I'm going to go back into that first corner at the bottom, wrong side to right side, and that creates this figure 8 right here, subtle, that connects the two shoulders. And then I'm going to begin V to A, and so on, taking care at those stair steps, and then getting to the very end of the seam and just leaving everything, all the tails, for later. In the next video for the blurred line sweater seaming, I will show you how to set in a drop shoulder sleeve onto the side of this sweater. So stay tuned. Happy seaming.